We've learned that we can have a better relationship with each other by learning to attune and learning to see how our emotions are impacting others, and then we can kind of get to a more even keel place. Now, what about when you're on your own? Maybe you're away from whatever help that you normally have, or you're away from other people. How do we self-regulate? I'm going to give you 3 ways that you can do this immediately. Think of it as like a top-down override to a physiological emotional reaction that you're having to something. And so you can remember this with the acronym TIP, T-I-P. T is for temperature. Cold exposure is a way that forces your body almost to get in a more settled state. Now, why does this work so well? Well, when your body experiences cold, especially in the form of maybe a cold shower, maybe even you just splash some cold water on your face, or indeed go all the way into a cold plunge or something like that, the body is getting a signal of, hey, there's a chance I might drown. And when the body gets that signal from an exterior source like cold water, what it's going to do is prepare for an event like drowning. What happens there? Your body starts to become more efficient with oxygen. So your heart rate is going to decrease. Your vagal tone, which basically is just a way of describing the charge of your central nervous system, is going to go down. Suddenly things start to be more conserved within your body. So it's almost like the body is saying, I don't have enough resources to be anxious and spun up about something else. I might drown here in a second. Now, obviously, when you're doing your cold exposure, you're not actually placing yourself in any sort of danger of that sort, but that is kind of the override that you can do for this way of self-regulating. And in fact, when you get into cold water for about 3 minutes, and we're talking temperatures between 40 and 50 degrees, you can stimulate your level of dopamine by 2 to 3 times for the next 4 or so hours. It is really hard to be in a worse mood after you get out of the cold exposure, even if in the meantime, it can be a little bit miserable. I stands for intense exercise. There's a term in psychology called sublimation. Basically, all that means is that I'm going to take something that's very charged here and then route it through something that's a little bit more focused and maybe even productive. Think of it like you have a balloon. You're rubbing the balloon on something and you want to go stick it over your brother or sister's hair and make it stand up on ends. So you can think of being dysregulated as having this like charge. It's like, I need to discharge somewhere, right? And there's energy involved in that. And so by kind of displacing that into exercise, that is a really reliable way of taking that hormonal level of that emotional charge and putting it into a more productive area. Now, we can go too far with this, just like we can go too far with a lot of things. So you can imagine somebody who just is at the gym 5-6 hours a day because they just really don't want to deal with other things. There is that extreme, but for a lot of us, getting in maybe even just like an hour of extra activity, or indeed just knock out as many push-ups as you can in a given moment. It's kind of this way of discharging all of that kind of emotional static. There's even been some research done recently about how the body kind of has an internal pharmacy. This is one way to think about it. And the muscles themselves have a type of hormone profile that they will release, but only when challenged in a hard way. These hormones are called myokines. If you want to go check that out, there's a great book called Joy of Movement that gets into the details here. But basically, if you put your body under a load, some type of exercise, whatever that is for you, it releases this sort of internal pharmacy that actually is better than your SSRI or other antidepressant. Most of the time, just using intense exercise is a really easy way of eliciting this dopamine response, this hormonal response that is counter to the emotional and hormonal response, say, to anxiety. Now, P is for paced breathing. You might think that breathing exercises, I mean, what could they really do? How much effect could they really have? It's almost just sort of the boilerplate advice of just like, oh, just take a deep breath. What I would offer is that there actually are some ways that paced breathing can make a massive difference. Most of the time, your breath is happening kind of in the background, right? It's below the conscious awareness. You're not thinking all the time, breathe in, breathe out. It's kind of in the same category as digestion. You don't ever think about, oh, now I need to contract my small intestine to get lunch through. It's all happening below the surface. However, with the breath, we can take conscious control of it anytime. It's kind of a cool connection between the conscious and unconscious parts of ourselves. So whenever we breathe, our diaphragm, that big muscle at the bottom of the torso, expands and contracts to make the lungs open and close and draw breath. And when it does that, it actually puts pressure, upward pressure onto the heart, which is connected to the rest of your nervous system, or relieves that pressure depending on if it's on the inhale or on the exhale. So what's the implication of that? It means that there's a mechanistic way to act directly on our nervous systems. So if we're spun up with this emotional response, that's our nervous system getting excited about something. So if we want to regulate that nervous system reaction, we can do that with the breath. And I'm going to show you 2 methods to do that really easily. The first method is called coherence breathing. If you want to learn more about where this kind of comes from, there's a great company called HeartMath that has a lot of science behind how this works. But basically, the way to do it is you match the length of your inhales and your exhales. So it might be, you could count up to 6 and then down from 6. So it'll be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the inhale, and then the same thing, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 on the exhale. That's helping to bring the sort of seesaw balance of the 2 branches of the nervous system, right, your rest and digest and fight or flight, into more of a coherent balance. That's why it's called coherence breathing. Snipers, for example, use this exact tool for being in a state where they're both very alert and aware, but not too much of one or too much of the other. Another one is called the psychological sigh. This one acts very quickly to help bring you down if you feel too charged up. Where coherence breathing was we're balancing the 2 sides, the psychological sigh is we're going to stimulate the rest part of our nervous system. If you've ever seen somebody crying recently, or you yourself were, your breathing pattern automatically goes into this rhythm that kind of sounds like this. It's like, right? Like that. This is sort of like the cry breath. And what's happening there is that's actually a mechanism to help bring your emotional state back down. And so the way it works is you take a big inhale in through the nose, and then a second inhale right after that, and then a long exhale out the mouth. So it'll look like this. And so how long did that take? Like maybe 10 seconds? You do 1 to 3 rounds of that, and that will make your nervous system come a little bit down off of where you were. Now, depending on the scenario, it might be from like an 8 down to a 7, but the point here is that we can have top-down control of how our nervous system responds. We are not just at the whim of our body's responses to things. And so hopefully with controlling your temperature, getting in some high-intensity exercise once in a while, and practicing paced breathing on a regular basis, we will have ways to co-regulate when we're by ourselves.